I'm Scott Muller, and the director of the M&A Research Center at Cass Business School. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about some of the research that we've recently conducted here at the school in the M&A area. Mergers and acquisitions is an area and a topic of great interest, especially right now as we're coming out of the recession. And working together with our sponsors, we have recently produced two pieces of research that did show how companies operated in the recession and how they should be operating now that we're coming out of the recession as relates to corporate alliances, divestitures, and the mergers and acquisitions. First off, let me just say something briefly about the M&A Research Center. It was founded about 2 years ago and founded with the very kind support of several companies that have provided not only some financial help for the school and for the M&A Research Center, but also provide us with a great sounding board for ideas that we have, and they have initiated a number of ideas as well. Two of the founding sponsors being Credit Suisse, the investment bank, and Allen & Overy, the law firm. Recently, we're very proud to have Ernst & Young, the accountancy and consulting firm, join us as a sponsor as well. Working together with the sponsors and also other academics here at Cass Business School and outside of Cass, we have worked recently on these two projects. The first one I would like to have us speak about is about distressed acquisitions. Obviously, during the recession that started in 2007 and became really quite a force after the fall of Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, there were a lot of distressed companies that were out there in the marketplace. I would like to actually turn over now to Anna Felton, who will speak about that distressed acquisition study that we've done.
We talked about this research in springtime 2009, and we thought, what's going to happen with the M&A market? The levels of activity have already gone down. What about distressed M&A? Is this going to be a time where we'll see companies buying other companies which is in distressed, or distressed companies who wants to change around their strategy and go ahead and do an M&A deal as a rescue strategy? That's the initiation of the project. And we collected originally 240,000 deals, which span a period of 25 years, back from 1985. And the final sample was 12,339 deals. Of those 12,339 deals, about 21% was classified as distressed. The first thing we looked at was activity. So as many knows, M&A activity is very cyclical and it's highly correlated with the stock market. As you will see in this graph, the correlation is above 0.9, which is very high, 1 being the highest number. With distressed M&A, it is slightly different. Distressed M&A tend to happen around and after a major crisis. We found that the number of distressed M&A deals will stay higher than average for about 3 to 4 years after a crisis, as you see in this graph. The same with bankrupt deals. The second thing we looked at was the type of acquirer, type of targets, the type of companies which are involved in these deals. We found that for distressed deals, or where the target was distressed, both companies involved, so the acquirer and the target, tend to be smaller than average, tend to be more distressed than average, and tend to come from the same industry, which shows that distressed M&A tend to happen within the same industry because the companies tend to buy core or to buy safe. The second thing we looked at was bankruptcy. What we found was that bankrupt targets tend to be larger, and the companies that buy bankrupt targets tend to be larger. And what that shows is probably that for distressed targets, because they're smaller, they don't have the sufficient fund to go through a bankruptcy process, which can be very costly. We also looked at performance, and we had two different metrics. We looked at event study, which is short-term performance, so the share price around and on the announcement date. And then we also looked at long-term performance. What we found was that markets tend to like when acquirers buy distressed targets. Now, in the long term, instead, we found that buying distressed often tend to destroy shareholder value. However, that's only from the acquirer point of view. If you look at it from both the acquirer and the target's point of view, so you compare the performance of the acquirer and the target combined 1 year before the acquisition to 3 years after, there tend to be an increase in return on equity and return on assets, which shows that from an economic point of view, actually these types of acquisitions make sense. So to take away, the conclusions of our study is, in terms of short-term performance using the event study methodology, the winners are the acquirers involved in acquisitions of distressed and bankrupt targets, which we think is driven by the low valuations. In terms of long-term performance, though, acquirers' shareholder value tend to deteriorate. However, combined pre-bid and post-bid performance suggests synergy realization in acquisitions involving distressed and bankrupt targets. Finally, pressure is on due diligence, acquisition planning, and integration because of shorter deal completion times for distressed M&A.
Looking at the other major piece of work that we have recently published, this being on joint ventures and whether in fact it's better to have done a joint venture at this point in the cycle or at another point in the cycle, we did the most extensive study of joint ventures ever on record that we have been able to find. We looked at almost 5,000 deals from an initial database of 120,000 deals from 1985 to 2009. What did we find? We found out that in fact it is, as we had suspected, a good time now to do a joint venture. Joint venture activity does increase after a market downturn. When in fact M&A activity decreases, which takes place typically when there is a recession taking place, you'll see that joint venture activity as a percentage of the activity taking place increases. One of the things we looked at was joint venture activity versus strategic alliance activity. And as you can see in this chart here, strategic alliance activity doesn't correlate as much with the recessions and growth in the markets as joint venture activity. And therefore, we did decide to focus the study on joint venture activity, as this chart shows, rising after each one of the two recessions, after the recession of 1990 to 1992, and then the recession of 2001 to 2003. In comparing joint venture activity versus M&A activity, what we found was that whereas M&A activity is highly cyclical, going up and down with the marketplace, joint venture activity is more linked in with the economic cycles and therefore becomes an alternative as M&A activity declines. We also found that joint ventures reduce a company's risk profile. So it's probably right that CEOs, CFOs, and their boards are looking more at doing joint ventures rather than mergers or acquisitions at this point in the cycle when it is critical to reduce the risk of the company. What did we find? We found that overall, doing a significant joint venture does actually reduce the beta, the risk of a company, by about 3%. Interestingly enough, that rises to over a 6% reduction in the period immediately following a downturn. Also interesting, we found that that same decrease, that is the larger decrease in risk, also takes place around a market peak when there's also uncertainty in the marketplace. The best partners we found in the study were not too close to each other. That is, they weren't working too much in the same area. They were companies that could complement each other, but not necessarily compete with each other too closely. Conventional wisdom is that most joint ventures last about 6 or 7 years. Some people think that they're on average about 5 years. We found that the average joint venture lasts only about 3 years. And in fact, in our study, we eliminated the companies that had engaged in joint ventures that were less than a year in length, figuring that a joint venture that hadn't lasted for a year really wasn't one that had ever gotten off the ground. So even after excluding those, we found that somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 years was the range of the average joint venture. So what does that mean? It means pick your joint venture partner very, very carefully, because in less than 3 or 4 years, you're likely to have to unwind the joint venture. Most of the unwinding of a joint venture means that it is bought out, one side is bought out by the other side, and therefore a lot of the intellectual property and a lot of the activity will have actually gone to the other side. And in fact, in our study of the joint ventures, we did come up with a pre-deal partner checklist that does take this into account. Because as part of the study, We did interview a number of people in the industry, spoke with them about our findings, and said what did they think the implications really are. What did we find on this? We did find that the checklist should include the following. Will the other party be able to meet the long-term obligations on both the financial and strategic fronts? Does the other party provide full and accurate information during the negotiations? Does the other party deliver on time? Do you trust your direct counterpart at the partner company? Is the other party committed to a mutually beneficial relationship? Are the beliefs and culture of the other party's organization similar to yours? And because a joint venture is a mirror exercise, will your business be able to cope with the commitment required to make a jointly run business a success? As part of the M&A Research Center, we do 3 or 4 major pieces of research annually. The 2 that we've just talked about are the 2 that we've most recently published and publicized, but we have several other pieces of research that will be forthcoming shortly. One of them will be discussing the likelihood that a new CEO will do an M&A deal after they are appointed and have taken over their role as CEO. The second one is looking at different countries around the world as to whether they are more or less likely to be friendly to doing M&A deals. This is very important in today's world where most deals are cross-border, or whether in fact the regulatory environment is in fact friendly to doing those deals as well. In addition to that, we are speaking at a number of conferences about these reports. We're talking with other academics. We've just had a presentation in Milan, most recently also in Reno, Nevada, at some significant conferences. We look forward to doing some additional conferences as well, where we will be in both Rome and in Denmark, and another one back in the United States. We work together with our students to try to incorporate them into the research, to help us with the research, and also to allow them to develop their own dissertations and further projects to further their understanding. And of course, the M&A Research Center supports the teaching of mergers and acquisitions here at the school. In fact, the M&A Research Center was the brainchild, the idea of the dean of the school. And about 2.5 years ago, he, together with the Associate Dean for Research, approached me and asked me to start the M&A Research Center. This because of the leading edge activities that take place here at Cass in both the finance and management areas of academia. This is a cross-divisional research center incorporating research from the management as well as finance sides of the business school. We work closely with a lot of faculty here at the school. We work with other research centers. We are not aware of another research center focusing on M&A at any other major business school around the world. This is a unique activity here at Cass and driven by the fact that we are located here in the city with access to a lot of the M&A practitioners.